Here is Sailor 023. And at first seeing the chromatography, I thought this was such a deep, dark purple, it only looked black. Nope, it is a black. There is no tone shift as paper or pen change. This performs as a black ink should, with crisp, solid lines and no shading, delivering on an authority to the things you write, even something as benign as an ink review. On non-fountain pen friendly paper, it didn't waver in its solid performance with no feathering or bleeding. I do have a favorite black, and sadly, this isn't it. I would easily use a bottle of this and ask for more, like I was at an ice cream buffet. I mean, this is a really good black ink to be able to take a look at.
The pen for today is a Pilot Metropolitan. Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there by looking at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
This is how black inks should look on the page. No feather, no spread, no shading, good crisp lines, truly beautiful to look at, even when what you're doing is transcribing a math textbook, even if it's your favorite math textbook. Fantastic. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
Sailor makes more than one ink, so let's take a look at a few other inks from Sailor.
Here is Sailor Zodiac Aries. Here is Sailor Mother Pink.
Here is Sailor Studio 770.
Here is Sailor Clown Teardrop Ruby.
The second writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter notebook.
Here we can see we have the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather, does not spread, does not shade, does give great performance the entire time, making you very happy to be using this ink in all of your important notes, keeping the story moving forward. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
There's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down to immediately put into water to show the separation of those colors, making the ink. Now the one on the right is marked with a D. This is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's put into water. The third writing sample is done in a national brand Steno notebook.
Here we can see that the tone is the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather, does not spread, does not shade, does not suffer tone variation because of the toned paper, which is the reason to use this. This is a very opaque ink, meaning I would be surprised to see any kind of tone shift of the ink based on the paper that you're writing on. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, the smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. In the upper left, you can see where there is highlighter. In the upper right, that is pen flush. The lower left has a 1/3 bleach solution, and the lower right has plain old water. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather, does not spread, does not shade, performing perfectly as a black ink. On the quad rule, it stands out with no problem at all, which you would really expect when it comes to black inks. It makes the quad rule in the background truly fade away to where you're not seeing it and there's no visual confusion. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at a few more black inks that are out there.
Here is Califolio Noir. Here is Lamy Obsidian. Here is Levenger Raven Black. Here is Mont Blanc Mystery Black.
All of the inks that you just saw have a review here on the channel. Now, the next writing sample is done in a Composition Lab notebook.
Here we have the same tone as the Clairfontaine. Now, this paper would normally dull the tone of an ink a little bit. It does not do it here, making this really good for those student note takers out there. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it doesn't shade. It gives those great crisp lines. What a great ink to use for that student. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
While it's nice to see inks that are in the same color family, I prefer to find inks that complement the color on the page.
Here is Krishna Sakthi. Here is Diamine Hope Pink. Here is Krishna Yellow Valley.
Here is Montegrappa Harry Potter Gryffindor.
The best way you can support this or any channel that you like watching is to alert the retailer of where you saw the product at time of purchase. Now, the last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
Here we have the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather, barely has any spread at all, does not shade, does really well. If this is the paper that you write on very frequently, this is a great ink for you to be using. I am loving the performance that I'm seeing right here. Looking at the back of the page, now this is a dark black ink, and we do see spots that it's getting a bit darker in there, but look, there's very minimal ghosting. I believe with this black ink on this paper, you could write on both sides without destroying your notes. Obviously, nothing bled through touching the page underneath, but what a great combination of ink and paper for those that use the more inexpensive papers more frequently.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The Pilot Metropolitan has a slightly drier than average medium nib and delivers flawless color, flawless dark black lines. It is absolutely beautiful. Off camera, I tried this in a very dry fine to try to expose any kind of weaknesses, and it did. It did come across as a little bit of a kind of faded black or a very, very dark gray. So let's keep this the beautiful, crisp, dark black lines when using a medium flow pen of any nib size.